Please be seated.
Your Honour, I call Brother Brian Brandon.
Brother, will you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
For the Bible.
Would you take the Bible that's there in your hand, please, and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat, please.
Brother, can I ask you to state your full name, please?
My name is Brian Joseph Brandon.
Thank you. And the Commission hasn't asked you to prepare a statement for these proceedings, but we asked for a copy of your CV, which you've provided. Your Honour, can I tender a copy of the CV of Brother Brandon?
Brother Brandon's CV will be Exhibit 28-144.
Copies
Small,
for the
but I can see
Commission.
that.
I'm sorry.
That's pretty small, but I can see it.
We've got a paper copy for you there, Brother.
Thank you.
It indicates that you joined the Christian Brothers Junior in 1953 and went on to have a series of teaching roles between 1959 and 1984, or January 1985 rather, including as headmaster of different institutions. I'll ask you a little about different positions later on, but I want to start by asking you about your time as a member of the Provincial Council of the St Patrick's Province, and you served in that role, as I understand it, from May 1984 until May of 1996.
That's correct.
And do I take it from your CV that was effectively a full-time role?
That I what? Sorry.
That was basically a full-time position?
Yes, the first 6 months or so I was also headmaster at St Kevin's College, but basically it was full time.
Thank you. And you also had some other roles, which I'll ask you about during that time, as province bursar and business manager. Is that right? Thank you. But just focusing first on the Provincial Council, can you explain your understanding of the responsibilities of the Provincial Council generally?
The Provincial Council existed to provide advice as sought by the provincial. The major superior, so-called, of a province was the provincial, the executive officer, if you like. The Provincial Council was a council appointed to support the provincial in his role. The councillors were there to form that council and to provide support. They didn't have any executive role. They were called on by the provincial for advice. They met with the provincial in regular meetings called Provincial Council meetings. There were records kept of those meetings. The provincial himself generated the agenda for those meetings. The members of the Provincial Council assisted the provincial in what's called visitation. The provincial himself was involved from time to time in that visitation process too. By and large, that was the role of the Provincial Council.
Thank you. So executive decisions were implemented by the provincial? rather than by the council.
Yes.
And are you saying that the council's role was advisory rather than decision-making?
The Provincial Council did make some decisions, but they were not binding in terms of any constitutional law. They were the opinion of the Provincial Council. They provided guidance to the Provincial in terms of what the Provincial Council thought about a particular issue.
So, to take an example of a decision on whether a particular brother should be moved from one community to another within the province, is that something that the council would effectively come to a decision on, albeit one that is just the opinion of the council?
That would be something that let me put it another way, the question would be a question that the Provincial would have brought to the council for its consideration. The issue would be discussed by the council, and in virtually every case there'd be some sort of consensus reached as to what the best resolution of the question was, and that would be recorded as a decision. That's the nature of the decision. So it wasn't actually the council making a decision, it was the council coming to some sort of consensus as to whether this was a good move or not a good move. In the long run, it was a matter for the Provincial to implement whatever he decided to implement, but that was a council consensus about what was probably the best way to go in that matter.
Thank you. And the issue of movement of brothers within the province was a regular item on the agenda of provincial council meetings?
Yes, but not every meeting. I mean, we had meetings pretty often once a week. So as an agenda item, it probably occurred 4 or 5 times a year, not every week.
Thank you. Can I ask you a little more about the visitation process that you referred to a few moments ago? What did you understand to be the purpose of the visitations?
Visitation probably had 2 or 3 purposes. Provincial councils, as they were called, when I was first on the leadership team, came a little later to be called, as I just indicated, leadership teams. The primary purpose of visitation was to provide an opportunity for those leadership teams to be in communities and to exercise some real on-the-ground leadership with those communities. It was often exercised by dint of community interaction with meetings and conferences and other forms of interaction with the community. The Provincial Council, the Provincial himself particularly, had a governance responsibility, and visitation was one means of his exercising that responsibility, perhaps per medium of the Provincial Councillor, and one way in which that was done was by the visitor sitting down with each of the members of a community, seeing where they were in terms of how they felt they were placed in community, and inquiring about their ministry, what they were doing in school, how it was going, how life was for them, how they fitted in terms of community life. So there was generally a one-to-one meeting of a visitor with each member of a community. Basically, that was the purpose of, that was what happened on the ground.
Yes.
And the visitor would report to the provincial after a community visitation.
I'll ask you about the reports in a moment, but just dwelling on the role of the visitations.
Yep.
Firstly, I take it part of the purpose of the visitations was to check up on the welfare of the brothers themselves each year?
Check up was to sort of promote, facilitate, push along, check up to the extent to see how they're going and to help them in that process.
And there was also an element of supervision of the brothers to see that they were performing their functions appropriately?
That would have been incidental to that, yes.
But that was a topic covered in visitation reports?
Where necessary, yes.
So where necessary in the sense that if there was a concern about the conduct of a brother or their ability to perform their functions as a brother, that's something that you would expect to see recorded in the visitation reports?
Generally speaking, I think, yes.
You carried out a number of visitations yourself during your time on the Provincial Council, is that right?
I didn't quite hear that, sorry.
You carried out a number of visitations yourself?
Yes, I did.
And I'll take you later to some particular examples. And it was your practice to meet individually with each of the brothers in the community during your visit?
It was.
And I take it you would also meet with the superior of the community?
Yes, well, he was one of the members of the community, yes.
But in meeting with the superior, would you ask the superior about whether he had any concerns about particular brothers within the community?
I would obviously have inquired about how he felt about the community, yes.
And in your experience, did that normally elicit concerns if a superior had them about particular brothers?
I think that was generally forthcoming.
Yes. It's something you would have expected for the process to be working properly.
I didn't hear that, sorry.
It's something that you would have expected if the process was going to work properly. That is, that the superior would tell you if there was a problem with members of the community.
That would have been my expectation.
The visitation reports were considered to be reports to the provincial, is that right?
Yes.
Would all members of the Provincial Council be given a copy of all of the visitation reports?
Not automatically. There wasn't any defined process for that. I would say that generally visitation reports, once completed, would have found their way into the hands of each member of the Provincial Council for information.
Yes. Can I ask you about the other roles that you had held during this period? Firstly, as the province bursar and business manager between 1985 and 2002, you've indicated on your CV that one of the responsibilities there included legal. Was a part of that role that you were responsible for managing criminal and civil proceedings affecting brothers within the province?
Yes, but as a servant of the leadership team. Right. In other words, I would have managed the mechanics of those things.
Yes, but reported to the council.
Yes.
and to the provincial?
The decision-making body was the Provincial Council.
Thank you. And so, as part of that role, when claims of abuse were raised involving brothers within the community, within the province rather, did you review the records within the province about the history of the brother concerned?
As far as they were available to me.
Can you just explain what was available to you in terms of records?
Well, I can only say what I've just said is
Well, perhaps I'll give you a more specific example. One of the issues that was important in terms of managing claims was whether insurance would be available to indemnify the brothers. Is that right? And that insurance was provided by CCI, the Catholic Church insurance body.
Yep.
And it was a condition of their insurance policy that they would not indemnify for any period, or for claims rather, in respect of any period after which the Provincial Council had knowledge that the brother in question was at least suspected of child sex abuse. Is that right?
Or whether was it in knowledge of it, yes.
Knowledge of it, yes. And I'll take you to some documents later, but the approach that CCI ended up adopting was that what they were interested in was knowledge on the part of the Provincial Council and whether knowledge had therefore reached any member of the Provincial Council. Is that right? So in managing claims against a brother within the province, one of the issues you had to investigate was at what point did knowledge of abuse by a particular brother reach either the Provincial Council as a whole or a member of the Provincial Council. Is that right?
That's correct.
So in order to investigate that issue, you needed to interrogate historical records to find out what they showed about knowledge.
That's correct too.
So if you were carrying out that exercise, what records were available to you to find out what had been known in the past?
The Christian Brothers held some records in some newly established archives at Parkville. Christian Brothers didn't have any archives at Parkville until approximately 1980. So records were a little thin, so to speak, but there was one source there of knowledge of our history. There may have been some records available in terms of schools, if the person's history related to the schools. So they'd be the main two sources of possible information. But I would have conscientiously sought, given a particularisation of the case, any possible source of information.
Thank you. From 2002 to 2008, your role included Legal Affairs and Property Development Coordinator. Just focusing on the legal affairs aspect of that, you continued to be responsible after 2002 for coordinating the management of claims against brothers within the province. Is that right? You also say on your CV that from 1993 to the present, you were involved in professional standards management for the province. Can you just explain what that involved?
Didn't hear you, sorry.
What did your role in professional standards management from 1993 onwards involve?
In general terms, it evolved depending on the increasing complexity of the task that as a province for St Patrick's up to 2007, and then for Oceania from 2007 up until the present day. So that's a fairly complex story, but up until the end of 2007, or up to October 2007, it was a more limited role because St Patrick's Province was simply Victoria and Tasmania.
Right.
So I was responsible for managing, on behalf of the Provincial Council, claims and the legal process associated with any professional standards matters. Beyond 2007, up until the end of October 2014, I was Executive Officer for Professional Standards for Oceania Province. So, in essence, they were my roles in terms of professional standards.
Excuse me. Professional standards included claims of sexual misconduct by brothers.
Yes, it would have included that.
Thank you. I want to ask you some questions about the complaints which were made against Brother Dowland. Is Brother Dowland one of the brothers who gave you cause to review the history of knowledge within the province about his sexual misconduct?
Yes. I should perhaps go back a step and ask you a more general question about the Provincial Council. When you joined the Provincial Council in 1984, was there any process by which you were briefed about issues within the province that you needed to be mindful of? I don't now recall any particular process, but the Provincial at that time had been on the previous Provincial Council, so he would have been in a good position in terms of carryover of information. So I think any briefing would have been a gradual process.
Right. But you would have expected, it was Brother Norton that was the Provincial at that time, was
No,
it?
he wasn't.
I'm sorry, who was the Provincial?
The Provincial was Brother Frank Chappell.
Thank you. So you're saying that you would have expected the Provincial to convey to you over time the issues that were important to discuss within the Provincial Council?
To convey to the Council as a whole.
Thank you. Can I ask you, please, to look at the screen, and if we could have tab 262 from the bundle. Can you see that, brother? This is an email exchange between you and Peter Dowling from September 2004. And you'll see a number of names have been concealed and pseudonyms applied. But I want to ask you about the third paragraph down, and there's some discussion of recollections in relation to a brother who's referred to as CCK. And if you need to have a look to understand who CCK is, brother, there's a list just on the table there next to you of pseudonyms, and at the very bottom of perhaps the second page, you see CCK there.
Yep.
So you'll understand now the reference to who CCK is. Just coming back to the email, about the middle of the paragraph, it says that Mrs. CCA did tell CCK that a brother, apparently Ted Dowland, was taking pictures of her other boys in the showers at Ballarat. CCK did not know if this was true or not, but he did tell Ron Stewart about Mrs. CCA speaking to him, including her comments about the boys in Ballarat. It seems from the context and surrounding documents that that complaint about Brother Dowland taking pictures of the boys in the showers at Ballarat would have dated to about 1971. Until you received this email, were you aware of that complaint?
No.
If the information was conveyed to Superior Ron Stewart back in 1971, is that something you would have expected the Superior to pass on to the Provincial?
I don't know I don't know what the Superior might have thought about that in 1971.
When you were told about this in 2004, did you recognise it as fairly significant information about what Brother Dowland was doing?
Yes.
Because the conduct was highly inappropriate.
Yes.
But you're not suggesting that the Superior back in 1971 would have failed to recognise that?
I didn't quite hear that.
You're not suggesting that the Superior back in 1971 would have failed to realise that it was significant inappropriate conduct?
I'm not suggesting anything.
What about in the visitation report, or the visitation process rather, if you'd been carrying out a visitation to Superior Stewart's community, would you have expected him to tell you information like that as part of the visitation?
That would generally happen. So I would simply say that would generally happen.
Yes. Because that would be a concern of the kind we talked about earlier, a concern about the behaviour of a brother within the community.
It would be a concern. And I'm certainly speaking from the perspective now of what I know.
Yes. But even, I think you accepted a moment ago, even the information on its own would have been a significant...
It would be, yes.
Yes. Can I ask you, please, to look at another document that's tab 83. Excuse me. Brother, this is a, if we just scroll down, you'll see from the top there that this is a visitation that you carried out in February of 1984 for the East Melbourne community, where Ted Dowland was a brother at the time. There's no particular reference in the body of the report.
Just as a matter of accuracy, I think it was probably February 95 in relation to 1984.
Thank you.
Because I was not on the leadership team in February 84.
Thank you. So this would have been, in fact, one of your first visitations.
Yep.
Now, do you remember any issue being raised with you by the Superior about Brother Dowland?
I didn't hear that.
Do you remember any issue being raised with you by the Superior at the start of 1985 about Brother Dowland and his behaviour with children?
I don't recall any now.
Can we look, please, at the document behind tab 87? This is a visitation report carried out later in 1985. This is July 1985, and if you scroll to the very bottom of the document, on the third page, this visitation was carried out. Sorry, just keep scrolling down. By Brother Noonan. Brother Noonan was another member of the Provincial Council at this time. So the visitation report for East Melbourne, on the second page, towards the top, deals with Ted Dowland. You'll see there it says a number of things about Ted Dowland, and then in the middle of the paragraph it says, "How well discerning he is, I would question. Tony is a relative of his and finds this a hindrance to speaking the truth to Ted in love. Tony remarked that Ted is overly affectionate in expression with his boys. Ted felt that he was not imprudent in his expressions of affection when confronted with this remark." Do you remember discussing this visitation report on the Provincial Council back in 1985?
I don't remember that now. I think the expression there is overtly, not overly.
I'm sorry, you're quite right. Thank you. Do you remember the topic of Ted Dowland being overtly affectionate in his expression with boys becoming a topic of discussion in the Provincial Council?
Not specifically. I do remember that Ted Dowland and the issues that Ted Dowland had in terms of emotional maturity and coping with life was a topic of consideration from time to time by the leadership team.
Was it an aspect of those discussions that he had issues with the way he behaved with children or related to children?
I think that his emotional immaturity would have showed itself in terms of the way he related to everyone, including children.
Can we turn, please, to the document at tab 85? This is a letter written by Ted Dowland. It's addressed to Dear Paul and my community. Do you know who Paul might be?
Sorry?
Do you know who Paul might be?
It's probably Paul Noonan.
Thank you. And if we could turn over, please, to the fourth page, 0092. just scrolling down, Brother Dowland said this, all that I've previously mentioned are forerunners to my most crucial point, and that is Ted Dowland and his desire to love and be loved. There are lots of things intellectually and spiritually that I am so inadequate in, but I do know that the greatest gift that our God gave me was and is my ability to love. The greatest aim in my life over a number of years has been to be a great lover. This to me is the charism of Jesus and our founder. My urge to love is just so strong within me. Of course, the question is, how does God want me to do this? You mentioned, Paul, when we were speaking, that some people had mentioned to you, that I was too affectionate. Perhaps this is true, but as far as I'm concerned, this is me, and I have this dream that love can be the motivating force within my classroom. On the assumption that this was a letter addressed to Paul Noonan, is that something that Paul Noonan passed on to the other members of the Provincial Council?
I can't say that for sure.
You can't remember seeing this letter at the time?
I don't remember that.
Right. Would you agree with this, that it seems Paul Noonan had been sufficiently concerned about the question of Brother Dowland being too affectionate with boys that he had raised it with Brother Dowland?
It seems to indicate ongoing dialogue.
I'm sorry,
It does seem to indicate some ongoing dialogue between Paul and Ted.
Yes, thank you. But you don't remember Paul Noonan conveying to you or the other members of the Provincial Council that there was a need to pay particular attention to Brother Dowland in this regard?
I don't recall that.
Thank you. Can we have, please, document 129? This is a statement that was provided in 1994 by a woman who's been given the name of CCF. She was the mother of children who were attending Cathedral College in East Melbourne. And if we could just scroll down a little, she indicates that she overheard her child, CCG, say to his friend after watching a television program about child abuse, "That's what Brother Dowland does at school." And she then describes talking to CCG about this and CCG telling her Brother Dowland often touches their private parts when he is reprimanding them either at the back of the classroom or outside the classroom. CCG also told me that Brother Dowland had touched him on his private parts and that it was common knowledge at the school that the students believed Brother Dowland had a problem with touching them. Just moving down to the next paragraph, CCF thought about this for a couple of days and decided to ring Cathedral College. On the 25th of October 1985, she rang the college and spoke to Miss Johnson and asked her if she was aware of Brother Dowland's problems. Just pausing there, do you know who Miss Johnston was?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Miss Johnston sounded surprised about what I had told her. I did not give Miss Johnston my name, and I asked her to look into it, and I would give her a ring in a couple of weeks. She goes on to say in the next paragraph, a couple of weeks later, I rang back Miss Johnston, and this time she was more interested in finding out who I was rather than what I was saying. Miss Johnston denied that anything was going on and that she discussed it with Dylan, and I spoke to him. Again, just pausing there, Brother Dylan, what was his role?
He was the principal.
Thank you. And she goes on to say, Brother Dylan was only interested in finding out who I was, and he wanted me to attend at the college in person to talk about the matter. All I wanted to do was for Brother Dylan to look into the matter, and I got the impression that Brother Dylan knew what was going on, as he was not interested in what I knew or what I thought was going on. And as I said before, he was only interested in finding out who I was. And she says, just over at the top of the next page, that in substance she didn't push the matter any further and just told her son to try and defend himself against Brother Dowling. Is that a statement you've seen before, brother?
I don't know when I saw that first.
So you have a recollection of seeing it before, but you can't remember when?
I certainly would have seen it in terms of the police proceedings.
Yes.
So I can't say that I saw it before that.
Thank you.
Well, I obviously didn't see it before the police proceedings.
Yes.
So I did not see it before 1994.
Okay, thank you. Dealing with the information rather than the statement, when did you first become aware that a mother had tried to make a complaint of this kind to the school at Cathedral College in East Melbourne and had effectively been rebuffed?
I certainly wasn't aware of it before I saw the statement.
So no one in 1985 relayed to you that this complaint had been made at the school? Can we have tab 89, please? This is an example of an agenda for a provincial council meeting from the 30th of September 1985. You'll see, just scrolling down a little, item 13 is some personal matters. The first of the named brothers is Ted Dowling.
Yep.
Can you recall what personal matters were on the agenda back in September 1985 for Ted Dowling?
No, I can't.
Can we have tab 95, please? Thank you. This is a visitation report from August of 1988. There's a page before that indicates the date, but I'll take you to the key part of it. It's a visitation report from August 1988 that was prepared by Brother O'Loughlin. And towards the bottom of that page, the visitation report deals with Ted Dowling. If we could just pause there. And I want to ask you about the reference towards the end of that paragraph. About 6 lines up, it says, John O'Halloran mentioned that a Year 7 boy from St Augustine's supposedly indicated during therapy that Ted had related to him improperly in some way. This was passed on to John by Tim Bilston. John in turn passed it on to Ted. John is convinced that there could be no substance in the allegation. Tim apparently said this to John also more recently. I did not raise this matter at all with Ted. Do you remember that prompting any discussion within the Provincial Council about the subject matter of...
I don't recall that doing that.
Does it cause you any concern looking at this now that the information that a boy had communicated that Brother Dowling had related to him improperly in some way was effectively dismissed out of hand as having no substance?
The issue, as it's recorded, was raised in the first instance, it seems, with Tim Bilston, whose role was leadership within the St Augustine's community. Now, I can't answer for what action Tim Bilston took, but there is a statement there that Tim apparently said this to John also. In other words, that Tim apparently dismissed the matter. It was raised with John O'Halloran, who was the superior of the community, who made some judgment that the matter was of no substance too. So there was some sort of process, if you like, of at least leading to a judgment at the local level.
Yes.
And the report and it was raised by John, it's indicated, with Ted. So the matter did receive some attention at that level of authority. And Mark O'Loughlin is noting that in this report. Now, I can't comment on what attention the provincial might have given to this matter, or whether it was brought forward afterwards as a matter for further consideration, or was fed into the general sort of information basket around Ted and his issues. I don't remember that. In fact, I don't actually remember seeing this particular report. I'm not saying I didn't see it, but we didn't see necessarily every report every time. And given that there were about 40 communities in our province, we weren't all necessarily present for every meeting either, given that there were meetings on every Monday roughly. Our visitation process took us to Fiji and Africa and all over the place, so that some of us missed meetings. That's not an excuse, but I'm just saying that I don't recall that specifically.
So putting to one side whether you saw the visitation report itself, do you remember it being conveyed to you in or around 1988 that a student had indicated that Ted had related to him improperly in some way?
I don't recall that specifically, no.
That would have been an unusual complaint to arise, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When it talks about relating improperly in some way, if someone had said that to you back in 1988, you would have appreciated that there was some sexual connotation to what they were saying.
I would have interpreted that comment in that way, yes.
You mentioned that Ted Bilston had a leadership role in relation to that community. Can you just explain a bit more what that is?
He had a leadership role in relation to St Augustine's Boys' Home, and that's apparently where the boy resided.
Right. So he wasn't the superior of the community.
He may have been. I'd have to have the records available to me in relation to that to tell, but St Augustine's Boys' Home operated separately from St Mary's. And again, I'd need the records, but it may have been that Ted was doing some work at St Augustine's, even though he was living at St Mary's.
Thank you.
In that memorandum, there's a reference to the poor state of community life. Do you see that? In the middle of that paragraph, there's a reference to the poor state of community life.
I'm sorry, Your Honour, I didn't quite hear.
If you look at the paragraph in the screen before you, right in the middle of it, there are the words he recognises the poor state of community life. Do you see it? Going to bring the red dot back again. See there? You see those words?
Yes, I do.
What would that be all about?
I'll just comment that that's a judgment that Mark O'Loughlin is making about the community that Ted is in, and it probably refers to the quality of community relationships, the quality of prayer life, and the quality of mutual support that's there for brother in that community at that time. That's my interpretation of what that means.
Well, suggests, does it, that the community wasn't functioning very well?
I'm sorry.
Does it suggest that the community was not functioning very well?
I agree with that suggestion.
And to your knowledge, was that the case? This community didn't function very well?
My general recollection is that this community was trying to recollect now from the distance how well this community was functioning. My recollection is that the community was probably struggling to function as well as it would have been expected that it would function.
And why was that?
That would go, in the first instance, to the quality of leadership of the community. It would go, secondly, I think, to the composition of the community and the capacity of individuals to contribute somewhat spontaneously to the life of the community.
So it had a poor leader, did it?
I'd say, I wouldn't say a poor leader, I'd say a leader who was a little bit monodirectional in terms of his view of community life.
And who was that?
The community leader was John O'Halloran.
And then you say the capacity of individuals to contribute spontaneously. Do you mean they weren't very good at contributing to their community?
These are judgments being made now off the cuff from the distance, but in a general sort of sense I agree with that.
Well, they're issues of significance to us because there was clearly a problem in this community. You visited upon children from some of its members, wasn't there?
Yeah, I don't disagree.
And can we see in reality that the Christian Brothers have maintained a community which, in many respects, including the abuse of children, was an inadequate community?
I agree that the community was struggling, and on the basis, particularly on the basis of the report that was provided to the leadership team at the time.
Can we have the document behind tab 297, please? Brother, this is a police statement of a Robert Charles Thompson. Mr. Thompson was a lay teacher at various schools, including at St Mary's College in Geelong. And can we turn over, please, to point 1185? And just below the large section of black, I want to take you to this passage. He says, "I resumed my teaching duties at the school, and to my shock and dismay, I then discovered that another pedophile brother named Des Dowland had been transferred to St Mary's from St Joseph's Catholic College to assume a teaching role at the school. This was only a short time after someone else had left. Dowland's inappropriate behaviour with the students was worse than the other person, and I couldn't believe what was happening. Within a short period of time, I was beginning to receive complaints from students about Brother Dowland and that he was sexually interfering with them. Again, I took the decision to approach Brother O'Halloran about the matter. I received an abrupt and curt response from Brother O'Halloran, and I thought, here we go again." He goes on to say, "After I approached Brother O'Halloran about Brother Dowland, I began to notice that I was being frozen out at the college. My relationship with Brother O'Halloran was at an end. He asked me to resign and threatened me. He said he would, in the end, get me." Now, Brother Dowland was at St Mary's College in Geelong in 1987 and 1988, so it seems that that is the time period in question here that Mr Thompson was making these complaints to Brother O'Halloran. Were those complaints relayed to you?
I don't recall that exactly, but it's likely.
Likely back in 1988 that you would have been informed that these complaints had been made to Brother O'Halloran.
It's likely that they were reported to the leadership team.
And do you remember discussing it on the Provincial Council?
I don't remember discussing it.
It would have been highly significant, wouldn't it, that a lay teacher had passed on complaints from students that Brother Dowland had been sexually interfering with them?
Can you repeat the statement?
Yes, it would have been highly significant information for the Provincial Council.
It would have been.
And you're saying that it was probably discussed, but you just can't remember the specifics?
Yes, I say that.
Brother Dowland, if we could have tab 98. Brother Dowland was on the agenda at the Provincial Council meeting again in 1988. Tab 98 should be a Provincial Council agenda. Thank you. Over on the last page of that document, 0482, this was under section 3 of the agenda, dealt with reports, and item 3.7 was Ted Dowland. Does that prompt your memory about any discussion on the Provincial Council in November of 1988 regarding Ted Dowland?
No, it doesn't.
Just while we're there, on the same agenda at item 15 is CCJ. Do you know who CCJ is a reference to, brother? Bottom of the page, second last one.
Thank you.
Yes. Do you remember any discussion on the Provincial Council in 1988?
No, I don't remember that.
Thank you. I won't take you to the document, but Brother Dowland was on the agenda again in May of 1989. Any recollection of discussions about Brother Dowland in 1989?
broad-based question. I don't know specifically what you're referring to there.
All right, I'll narrow it for you. I'm asking you to focus on, if I could ask you to focus on the issue of complaints about sexual misbehaviour by Brother Dowland. Do you remember that issue being discussed on the Provincial Council in 1989?
Not specifically.
Well, you say not specifically. Do you remember it being discussed at all?
No. All I remember is the concern that the Provincial Council had about Ted Dowland and his capacity to cope with people and to grow up and to act maturely and to, generally speaking, to be responsible in the way that he interacted with everyone, really.
So that kind of concern might explain why he's a regular item on the agenda of the Provincial Council.
Why what?
That kind of concern might explain why he's a regular item on the agenda of the Provincial Council.
Yes.
But if Brother O'Halloran had passed on the complaint that students had been saying he had been sexually abusing them, that would have been a whole other category of concern, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I don't know what Brother O'Halloran passed on.
Focusing on what you and the other members of the Provincial Council talked about, when, to the best of your recollection, did you start discussing concerns about him behaving inappropriately in a sexual way with students?
That's difficult for me to know quite precisely. What I can say is that we did know in absolute terms in 1993, and there was innuendo prior to that, prior to the police action in 1993, towards the end of 1993. But prior to that, there was nothing by way of formal complaint. So there was nothing that the Provincial Council was able to sort of say, here is John Smith, or here is Mrs Brown, or here is John somebody else who has made a complaint. Let's come to the leadership team. So that's the difficulty that I have on that.
But the leadership team knew that he was a problem, didn't they?
Sorry?
The leadership team knew well before 1993 that Dowland was a problem.
What problem? Yes.
And they knew that there was suggestions that his behaviour with children was sexually inappropriate. They knew that, didn't they?
I knew there were suggestions to that effect.
Yes. Now look, when you have the responsibility for the education of young children and you have a suggestion to that effect, do you not think those with positions of responsibility in the management of the organisation have a duty to find out whether or not those suggestions have any foundation or not?
I do think there's a responsibility in that direction.
Yes, and you didn't discharge it, did you?
I'm not saying we didn't discuss that at all.
But you didn't discharge that responsibility. You didn't find out and either eliminate the possibility of inappropriate behaviour or confirm it, did you?
I'm not acknowledging that.
Sorry?
I'm not acknowledging that.
Well, what do you say you did?
I'm not able to precisely indicate what actions the leader of the day took in terms of following things up. I know that there was certainly plenty of interaction with Ted Dowland about what was going on. I know the province leader was assiduous in terms of interaction with him to try and know just what was happening. I suspect there was probably interaction by the province leader with John O'Halloran and probably also with Tony Dillon at East Melbourne. I wasn't party to those particular interactions, but to say that nothing was done, I think is not true.
Well, whatever was done was totally ineffective, wasn't it?
Well, that might well be true. And I think later events say that whatever was done was not effective enough, and I acknowledge that, and I acknowledge it with regret. But I don't accept that simply said nothing or did nothing and didn't want to do something.
Brother, you say that before 1993 there was innuendo to the effect that Ted Dowland was behaving in a sexually inappropriate way with boys. Is that right?
Particularly in 1993.
Right. How do you remember that first coming to your attention?
It came to the attention of the leadership team through the St Mary's community in Geelong.
And
incidentally, I was out of the country from about May of 93 to December of 93, but I know that from the Provincial Council records of 93.
just going back a little earlier in time, if we could have tab 116. This document's headed Community Review. Is that the same thing as a visitation report?
Yes, it's effectively, it's similar. You can translate it as more or less the same.
Okay.
I think too much importance is given to the term visitation report sometimes. It's, you can read community review in much the same light.
But it is the product of a similar process. A visitor goes to the community, speaks with the brothers, and then produces a report.
Yeah, although when there's no definition of visitation that says that's what you've got to do.
Yes.
That was just standard practice. In more recent times, the practice has varied very considerably.
Thank you. Now, this particular community review was one that you carried out in June of 1991 for the St Augustine's community, of which Brother Dowland was a member. You can see, if we can scroll down to the bottom of the page, under the heading Ongoing Concerns, you say some things about Brother Dowland, but they're essentially about him being very heavily committed and having trouble letting go. This is not helping him to just relax, etc.
Yeah.
Thinking back to that time, June of 1991, when you visited this community, were you conscious of any innuendo or suggestions that Brother Dowland had behaved in a sexually inappropriate way with boys?
I don't think so. On reflection, this community review was a mini visitation, if you like. It didn't have quite the length of time and the depth of interaction with community members that the more traditional visitation process did have. I forget the exact details now, but July 91 would have been pretty early on in the period of a new team in terms of composition for leadership, and I think this was a fairly brief community interaction. That's why you don't see a whole list of notes about each member.
Yes.
But there is some reflection there on Ted struggling, I think.
And just coming back to the question I asked you, thinking back to the time of this review in June of 1991, were you conscious at that time of any innuendo or suggestion that Brother Dowling had a problem behaving inappropriately with children?
I wasn't conscious then of problems that we might call sexual problems.
Do you accept, having seen the documents, including the ones that I've taken you to today, that that can only be because information hadn't been passed on to you by other people within the province that showed that there was very good grounds for concern about Brother Dowling?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Can we have tab 283, please? Just while that's coming up, the timing of...
No, I'm not sure we fully understand. Are you accepting that there was information within the Christian Brothers' knowledge of Dowling possibly sexually misbehaving with children, and you, in carrying out visitations, were not told of that information before you carried out the visitation? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Well, then can you help us to understand what you are saying?
As I understood the question, I was being asked was there some information there by way of visitation report, e.g. the 1988 report of Mark O'Loughlin that refers to some allegation, and I acknowledge that report exists, and I haven't got any quarrel with that. I've said that I wasn't particularly conscious of that. I'm not saying that anything was withheld from me or anything like that.
Well, again, can I press you? Because if it wasn't withheld from you, then the proposition must be that you knew about it, correct?
Well, honestly, I'm struggling to recall.
No, not
Now,
just a matter of logic. If it wasn't
I
withheld
understand-
from you, as
I
a matter of logic, you had to know about it.
I understand the logic, Your Honour.
Well, what's the answer to my question?
I don't know whether I saw that visitation report of 1988 or not. It's quite possible, probable, that I did, but I don't know that I did. It may be the first time I saw that is when it's come up in this tender bundle, but it may be that I did see it. In any event, the information in it was for the provincial. The issue of what should be done about it was something taken up presumably by the provincial, which probably came to a leadership team meeting, probably came into my purview as part of a discussion. So I acknowledge those things.
Well, if such information existed, and it plainly did, and you were being sent on a visitation, you would expect to be told, wouldn't you, what the problems might be in the organisation that you were going to look at.
I'd expect, generally speaking, that we'd have a broad idea of those things as a group before going, without a specific briefing being needed anyway.
Well, if you, or if the organisation knows that there's reason to suspect that one of the brothers is behaving in an inappropriate sexual way with children, and a senior member of the Brotherhood is going out to visit, do a review, wouldn't you expect, at the very least, that the person doing that review would look very carefully at the behaviour of the individual who was under suspicion?
Yes.
Did you do that?
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, if we're talking about, I need to know which community you're directing me to, but if you're talking about St Mary's Geelong, I presume you are.
Well, tell me about St Mary's Geelong.
Then I would have inquired of John O'Halloran as the leader of that community. I think as we're going with Ted, what was going on. I would have certainly inquired of Ted, but that mightn't have been a reliable source of information. I would have kept my nose to the ground, and I would have tried to pick up whatever information I could.
Did you pick up any information?
If I did, it would have been recorded. I don't recall anything.
Did you go there knowing of the suspicions that were held about him?
I would have gone there with whatever information was common to the leadership team at the time.
So you would have known of the suspicions?
So I would have gone there with a knowledge of the general innuendo that was available to the leadership team in that year. Whatever that was, which I don't recall precisely at this point.
And did you see it as part of your function in the protection of children to find out whether or not that innuendo, as you call it, may have had substance, or you could emphatically rule it out?
I certainly would have thought it was part of the responsibility of the Provincial Council to protect children and to do what was necessary and appropriate in respect of the behaviour of any and all of our brothers to that end.
Well, did you confront him and say, there's this innuendo around about you? What's the true story?
The innuendo was broad-based. It was, that's perhaps all I can say on that comment.
Well, did you confront him?
Ted? Yes, I would have. Well, from memory, I would have.
What do you mean from memory you would have? Did you confront him or not?
Well, it's a long time ago. I don't remember precisely what I said to Ted.
This would have been a somewhat remarkable issue for you to deal with in a visitation, wouldn't it? Innuendo of sexual interference with children, and you confronting the person who was the subject of that innuendo?
It would be unusual. That would be more commonly dealt with by a provincial in a one-to-one away from a visitation forum.
But you say to me that you did confront him, but you don't remember what happened.
That's true, and it probably would have been the vehicle for referring the matter to the other forum that I've just mentioned.
Well, again, you say you did confront him, but you don't remember what happened when you did.
That's true.
Can I just come back then to the specific question I asked you about June of 1991, which is the community review I took you to a few moments ago about St Augustine's in Whittington. Are you saying you confronted Brother Dowland in June of 1991 about innuendo regarding him behaving inappropriately with boys?
That's my recollection now.
You'll agree, we can scroll down to the bottom of the page there. Excuse me. There's nothing in the community review to suggest that that occurred or what conclusions you drew from that occurring. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that.
You'd agree that whatever your conclusions, it would have been important for you to report them to the provincial and to the other members of the provincial council.
Yep.
That is, whether you concluded that the innuendo was baseless or whether you concluded that there were good grounds for suspicion. Either way, it was important that the others should know that.
Yep.
Do you agree?
Yes.
That's not recorded in the written document.
As I've already commented, this was a fairly general sort of review. It wasn't a detailed person-by-person visitation report.
No, but brother, you became personal when you talk about ongoing concerns. We can see it there in the words. This was particular, wasn't it?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
The report, which is in front of you, is particular. It goes directly to and talks about Ted, doesn't it?
Yes.
They're not general comments. They're particular comments about Ted, aren't they?
In section 1, yes.
Yes. And it's under the heading ongoing concerns.
Yes.
Now, can I suggest to you that one would expect to find under that heading, when you go directly to Ted Dowland, that if you had taken steps to satisfy yourself one way or the other about the innuendo, you would have recorded it there in that report.
Well, I'm just operating from the best of my memory.
We don't need to operate from your memory. We've got the words in your report. It's not there, is it?
Well, I acknowledge that it's not there.
Yeah. And that might lead to the proposition that you actually didn't confront him at all and you didn't report back to the management people.
I'm indicating, to the best of my memory, what I think happened, independently of what's written there.
Very well, we'll take the morning adjournment.